Thank you, Emma, for a warm introduction. Diane and I, we're both seeing familiar faces and also new friends. The plan, I think, for the next hour or so is that we get to have a conversation, and then we get to have a conversation, and there are notes, I guess a card in the books, and yes, thank you for that demonstration. If a question occurs to you during our conversation, then at about 7:15 or so, maybe 7:10, we'll see how things go. We will collect them from the audience all at once, and then we'll be able to take as many of those questions as we have time for. So thanks for listening to our conversation, but we really do want it to be inclusive. I'm going to start out by asking Diane about the story of, well, first let's just start out with the story of writing this book. So why, in your very busy life, did you carve out the time to write what I think is a fabulous book?
Thank you. Thanks so much. Well, for many, many years, people told me I should write a book. I think when you start a school, it's so hard and crazy. People just think you should write those stories down. And sure enough, a lot of them made it into the book because they are maybe book worthy. But that was never enough to get me to write a book. What really got me to write a book was I've spent the last number of years in a lot of towns and cities across the country talking to a lot of parents and a lot of teachers and a lot of educators. And what I heard was a very common conversation about people having the same vision for their kids and being really frustrated that it wasn't happening for them in their communities. And a lot of people thinking they were alone in that. And so I wanted to have this conversation with everyone. And a good friend of mine who is an author finally said to me, Diane, a book is a conversation. It's a 6-hour conversation. What can you do in a 6-hour conversation? And I thought to myself, wow, in 6 hours, we can do a lot.
A lot.
So that's what put me over the edge to actually write the book.
And then the title, I'm sure you were very intentional about calling it Prepared. You could have called it whatever you wanted to, what kids need for a fulfilled life. Tell me more about what these words mean. What does it mean to be prepared, and what does it mean for a kid to grow up and lead a fulfilled life?
Yeah, the thing that I heard from parents, and this is the thing I believe as a mom, at the end of the day, what I want is my child to be happy. I want him to have a good life, and friends and family, and I don't want him to live in my basement. I want him to have enough success so he's out on his own.
You should probably be very explicit about
that. But
I
don't need for him to be, the most powerful or wealthy person in the world. I want him to be happy. And to me, that is what fulfillment is living your life with purpose and with meaning and people and relationships. And so we really believe at Summit that is our job as a K-12 education system in America, is to prepare kids so that they can enter adulthood equipped to lead a fulfilled life. And so it's pretty simple.
Now, not everybody in this, by show of hands, how many of you would self-identify as an educator professionally? So maybe half, and then let's assume the other half are doing things that could be considered education but not formally. For those of you who are in education, you may know that Summit, of course, has a reputation of helping their kids achieve excellence, so success. And I have been asked this question. I wonder what your answer is. Is happy to you something which is separate from being successful? Could you be a happy and fulfilled person and have terrible test scores, or not be talk about fulfillment and achievement, and how those play out at Summit, or how you think about them as a mother or as an educator.
Yeah, I think the way I think about them in both parts of my life, and what I've really come to learn, is it's almost counterintuitive. So I think a lot of people chase success and think that once they're successful, then they can pursue fulfillment. And so I think you see a lot of people sort of going hard and crazy after, a specific, whether it be amount of money or position or place in life, and then thinking after that, then that's when I can live my happy, good life. And actually what we've learned from both the science and our experience is the way to chase that success is through pursuing fulfillment, which is this weird
seemingly paradoxical, but actually not. Yes.
Because if you go and look at successful people and how they got there, those that are happy, you can be happy and fulfilled along the way, and you're more likely to be successful if you are happy and fulfilled along the way. But what that requires is that we think about success in not such a narrow way, and we think about it in a broader way, which the benefit of that is it's not now a win-lose game in our society, it's actually a win-win. Because if not everyone's competing for the same few titles or the same few positions, and in fact they're pursuing what makes them happy and purposeful, there's plenty of space for that in our world.
So I have an 18-year-old at home and then a 16-and-a-half-year-old. I'm a former math teacher, so I'm almost rounding up, but they hate that. So like actually 16 and a half, actually 18. So when I go home tonight, what message can I communicate to my kids? You know, because in a way, what you say makes total sense, and I completely agree. I think that for a lot of young people, it is an either or. It's like either I'm supposed to be like spending all my energy getting to the best college possible, or I should be worrying about, you know, social justice and, you know, the world, the environment. And it's very hard for them to think of these together. I wonder what advice you have for me, and also how does this play out in your schools?
Yeah, and I think we're in a similar position because I have the 17-year-old right there in between who, and I think our kids, like all kids in the country right now, are getting these really intense messages that their job is to get into the best college. And, you know, certainly I'm a believer in college as an opportunity for every child. I've built a whole system on that.
Yes, yeah.
So I do not want to in any way suggest that I'm not supportive of that, but not the quote best college in a stacked ranked list that the rest of the world has decided are the best colleges. For us, best college is the best fit, if it's the right fit. And so this is where I think the two things get married together, where, you know, Harvard, Stanford, they're both great places, we know personally, and are at the top of that list. They're not the right fit for the vast majority of kids. And so if they define their success by entrance into places that aren't the right fit, and it's not that they're not the right fit because the kids aren't good enough to go there. They really have a very specific culture and orientation that is only a fit for certain kids, versus 2,000 other institutions in the country that have very specific offerings that will be much better matches for all sorts of different kids. And so really what our kids should be doing is figuring out who they are so they can be a really good consumer of college. One of the things that worries me most is how people who are going to college and applying to college and paying $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 a year. I mean, think about that. That's buying an expensive car. Most of us
every year, really expensive car.
A real expensive car. If we were going to go do that right now, I think we would be very discriminating. I think we would expect a lot. I think we would be really choosy. I think we really shop around. We'd be saying, is that car good enough for my amount of money? The reverse is true in college. We're like begging colleges to take us. We're just hoping they will judge us good enough. I think my advice is like, no, that's a lot of money, and this is your most precious child. You should be asking them really hard questions. Do they deserve you and your child? And I think the institutions that, some of those at the top maybe don't.
And at Summit, how do you, like what, if I were at Summit and I were not 49 years old, but, you know, 15 years old, what messages would I be hearing? How would this, you know, play out in, you know, my routines or, you know, like, or praise or criticism? What does, how do you get purpose into an actual high school?
Well, a couple of ways, but you know, the first way is just what our kids are doing every day is engaging in project-based learning. And this is a way of learning math and science and history and English in a really engaging, problem-oriented, self-discovery way. So project-based learning starts with a big question that's actually relevant to kids, something they care about, and it asks them to go deep in it and explore it and figure it out. And I'll give you an example. One project my son Rhett is doing right now is a government project where the kids actually they pick a legislator, a real live legislator, they become that person, they figure out who that person is, they then figure out a piece of legislation they think that legislator would propose, and they actually draft the legislation, the policy proposal, and then they're going to try to get their other fellow legislators to build a coalition to actually pass it. So this is really hard, challenging stuff. You have to really know yourself and your values and your beliefs in order to take on this persona and write this legislation. And you're discovering who you are along the way. Now, that's a later stage advanced project, but the kids have spent years getting to that place. That's the type of work that's helping them figure out, who am I? What do I believe in? What do I care about? And it's super relevant. And so people who think that this generation doesn't care and they're not engaged could not be more wrong. They are paying attention. They are watching. They have a lot of thoughts about the types of laws we should be passing or not. So that's the core curriculum. And then there's a whole part of our program that's devoted to really having kids be exposed to, explore, and pursue interests. And, this is a lot of like trial and error and failure and try again. And they do this we carve out time for them to do deep dives into things. And they get to choose from, 50, 60, 70 different choices to explore different things, test it for 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, and then really think about and reflect, like, what about that did I like? What did I not like? Is that something I want to try again and go deeper on? Or is that something now I know is not a good fit?
This is for all grade levels?
All grade levels for all of their years. So if you do that over and over, year after year, you really start to know who you are.
So if you were a kid at Summit, so interest, and because I no longer teach high school, I teach university students, I will tell you, as you already know, there are plenty of 18 to 22-year-olds wandering the planet who are completely angst-ridden because they don't actually know where they're going when they're 22.
Because we didn't prepare them.
Because we didn't prepare them. And so I love what you said about having kids, I call the university students kids too, but really, be exposed to new things. Never thought about being a literary agent. Never thought about being a high school principal. And then exploring them, and then pursuing them. What can you get like granular? So like, what does it look like? How do they do that? Is it like all on the internet? What if on the second day you're like, nope, don't want to be a gynecologist anymore? Like, are you allowed to switch, or do you make them? Tell me more.
Yeah. And maybe I'll tell you through a couple of different stories. One student who's actually in the book, Mishka, is a really good example of where this just clicks. So he's a freshman at Summit, this 9th grade kid who really loves movies and thinks that that's something he wants to do. And so he gets this opportunity in his first expedition to do filmmaking. Filmmaking, it's a deep dive for 8 weeks over the course of the year. He does need to stick it out for the course of the year, which I think you'll probably appreciate. That's how you actually build grit, is you stick something out, even if it's not going to be your ultimate thing. So he does have to stick it out. Some kids do that, and they discover it's not their thing. For Mishka, this is his thing. And so the next year, in his sophomore year, he wants to go deeper. So he goes into the next level of filmmaking. And so now he's starting to pursue it. And this is putting light bulbs in for him. So he's now starting to do this outside. He's making connections. He's doing research. He's starting to do that on his own. By his junior year, he's ready to design his own experience. And so we work with him, and he builds 8 weeks of experience that includes an internship and all sorts of deeper experiences. And by his senior year, he's actually making his first film. And that is what he does. So that's like when it works perfectly and beautifully.
Yeah, it sounds good. I like that.
It doesn't always work that way. And so we have lots of kids who, another good example, we're in Silicon Valley, we're in the hub of technology, and we sent a lot of kids to do, short experiences in local technology companies. And so their first start is coding, and so we have kids who like that. And then, and so we had a group of them who went and did that. And then they went to the company to actually do the work. And here's a really good example of the conversation coming out of that. This one student says, I learned I don't want to actually be a software engineer. Like, I just don't like it that much, and I don't like the solidarity of it. I don't actually get into the flow the way other people do. There's a whole bunch of things he knows he doesn't like about it. But the parts he did like about it were when they would come together in these meetings, and there was this other role that would bring all those people together and really be the go-between between the engineers and the people who using the software and who was managing the project and communicating. And he was really interested in that role. And so we unpacked what we called the INGs, the INGs, of what he didn't like. So he didn't like being alone. He didn't like, 10 hours of coding all at one time. He didn't like it that much. What he did like were the collaborating, the translating, the understanding, and he started to understand about himself what he wanted. Will he end up being a project manager? I'm not sure. But he just started to discover the pieces of him that he's going to ultimately want to put together to become what is going to be something that's passionate for him.
So for both the parents and the educators in the room, if they're not lucky enough to be directly in a Summit public school at this time, is the beginning part of that exposure? Is it like open-ended? You can fill in, like if your student said horseback riding or like astronaut, or is it more of a multiple choice where you are giving them a menu of many wonderful options?
Yeah. Well, I think as parents, where we really enter this is in the activities or extracurricular activities that we're helping our kids engage in. And I think the exposed part should be as much of a multiple choice as possible. And I think that one of the unintended consequences of this kind of narrow focus on creating kids who are the best college application is that we've internalized this message of kids have to be deep in one area and expert. That's how they're going to stand out. And so, that goes all the way back now to little kids having to pick one thing and then stay with it forever.
3 years old.
Yeah, and now I'm going to be excellent at that. And what it does is it's closed off all these opportunities to really be exposed and explore. And so I would suggest that the best way to get to expertise is having this multiple choice opportunity, and that you don't have to start when you're 3 in order to be excellent. You can actually start later if you hit on the thing that really is your particular area of passion. And so as parents, I really would encourage us to think about, and there's limitations to this, like how can you expose your kids to as much for as long as you can until they sort of and feel comfortable that they're learning as much when they learn they don't like something as when they do like something. And that's not a failure or a miss. That's actually a hugely valuable piece of information for you as a parent and for your child. Now, like you, I think we both believe this. When you commit to something, you have to see it through until the end of that period. So we're not quitting mid-season or things like that. But once that happens, then I think making an active choice of whether or not you go forward is very appropriate.
So one of the things I love about this book, and it really is a great book. I read it twice, as you know, right? Like I read it the first time, but then it was like a long time until the book was written, and then actually now I reread it, and I love the stories, and also you're pretty vulnerable and honest about your own maybe not ideal childhood and your own experiences. So so what you're describing happens with your own son, Rhett, and then it was like, sounds great. But what was it like? Where are you from? Like tell me about your childhood and then how you got, this place.
Well, one of the reasons that I became an educator and I'm in schools is because a lot of what we're talking about wasn't happening in my home as a child. And so school was the one place where I had the chance to get this. And certainly a significant number of kids that we have the privilege of serving, that is true for them as well. And despite parents' best intentions, it's just not the circumstance. And so I grew up in a very chaotic home in that really marked by, it was very physically and emotionally unsafe. And, I think what schools don't know and understand and aren't necessarily equipped to deal with is when you're coming from a home that is chaotic like that into the school setting, you're not really ready to learn. And you're bringing a lot with you into the space that is really difficult to communicate and to convey. And so as a learner, I felt very misunderstood and not really seen. And I don't think it was no one was ill-intended, but that was just the reality of it. And so what my school thought of me is certainly not the person sitting here tonight.
Yeah, what kind of student were you? Where did you go to schools?
Yeah.
Like, where did you grow up?
Yeah, I grew up in Lake Tahoe, which at that time was a very small, poor mountain town, actually. People now think of it as this lovely
It's like
place,
a resort.
which it was at some level for people who didn't live there. But if you lived there, that was not your experience. It was a hard life, weather dictated what how most of our life, I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but I literally learned how to build the fire. Our heat source was the fireplace, and I built the fire starting at age 4. Like, I built the family fire.
Were you a good student?
Not at first. I was tested for special ed in elementary school. Yeah.
Yeah, and what was that because you were coming from, was
Yeah.
it because you were coming to
Yeah.
school and thinking about a lot more important
A lot
things
more
than,
things that were going, and I was afraid. I spent most of my childhood afraid because I had no idea what I was going to walk into at night. And, what we know about and what you know about the sciences, when your mind is in that state, it's really hard to learn. And so, and once in school, you're labeled as a delayed reader or not smart or not in the group. A, you start to take that on yourself. And B, that's how the school organizes around you then. And you just fall further and further and further behind. And so.
I will pick up that thread, but just so that we can get the full story of when you were young. So you were not a good student, or especially a good student?
I read late.
You read late. And then, when I met Diane, it was around a conference table, and at one end was Bill Gates and Melinda Gates, and then a lot of people who worked for them, who were very nice to Bill and Melinda Gates.
Yes.
And then there were a few people on the other end, and Diane was one, and I was one, there were a few. And I remember walking out of there, and I had 2 thoughts. One was, that was the best fried chicken I've ever had. Like, honestly, still the best fried chicken, because that was one thought. But the more important thought was, like, who's this? You were the most impressive person there. You really were. And I remember I came up to you afterwards and I was like, oh my God, I want to meet you. Like, I want to be you. I want to be with you all the time. So it seems to me, if I just knew that, I would have thought like, oh, she probably went to Andover or whatever. So I would not have guessed at this, like, tell me about like
What happened?
Yeah, what happened? And at what point did you start thinking like, oh, I'm actually potentially a smart person or a capable person?
Yeah. Well, I will be honest with you, to this day, when I walk on campuses, I now have this honor of getting to go back and lecture at Harvard and Stanford, and I eventually went to Stanford. I still have imposter syndrome. I still, to this day, walk into those places and think, I don't know if I belong here. So it stays that long. A couple things happened in my life. One, my mom finally divorced my dad, and so things sort of started to stabilize a little bit when I was about 8, and that was helpful. 2, my mom, for all the challenges she was dealing with, was a fierce advocate and didn't let the school sort of leave me behind. And so I give her a ton of credit for that, for making sure in her own way she was able to advocate for that. And so, eventually that clicked. I don't know if the self-perception, I remember in 8th grade winning this award at the end of the year ceremony and really being so confused by it because I just thought, I don't know how it's possible that I'm winning this award. So I don't know that I ever really have seen myself like that. I have kept this quote in my classrooms in drawers forever, which is, it goes something like this, aerodynamically, the bumblebee should not be able to fly, but the bumblebee doesn't know that, so it just goes on flying. And I sort of feel like I'm a bumblebee. Like, I don't know how I do what I do, but I just wake up and do it.
Like I said, I'm staying on your biography and you for a moment, but I won't, forget to go back to like how this extends to education. But on page 49, during a particular moment in the gestation of Summit, there was, a bit of a crisis, right? Which I won't, but you had a lot of them. You could have probably written it'd been a much longer book. But I underline this. I don't make promises I can't keep. And then, you say more about, what's going on. And then you said, I felt angry, undermined, and unsupported. I also felt determined, and this is on italics. Don't tell me I can't do something, I thought. I will prove you wrong. And I underline that in part because I've heard that exact language, I'll show you, I'll prove you wrong, from so many of the people that I study. And can you even guess where this comes from? Because it is not the typical response to challenge. And most people, when confronted with a real crisis, are not having the I'll show you, I felt determined, angry. Where does this come from for you?
Yeah, so a couple of things, I think. One, I got really lucky that there were a few key people, key moments in my life who, for whatever reason, saw something in me I didn't see in myself and decided to mentor and coach and guide me. And this is why that plus the science, one of the reasons why every Summit student has a mentor. So I got really lucky in that regard, I think. I think the second thing is I got out of my town. I had those people helped me literally get out. And I went to college and I studied psychology literally to figure myself out.
By the way, you're not alone. I'll just say, hang out with a lot of psychologists.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so it's funny, somehow I learned what was going on in me, and then that was how I kind of figured out how to become myself. Once I started figuring that out, I started getting really angry, quite frankly, because the deck is so stacked against kids like me, women, and let's be clear, I'm super fortunate. I look like this. I am not a person of color.
Right.
People of color have it 100 times harder than I do.
Yeah.
And so I just got angry at some point and thought, this is not right. And so I think the values in me of this isn't right. And oh, by the way, it's not smart. It's not smart in our society that we're just throwing people away. Right. We need to figure out, this is our job as an education system.
Okay, so that's a good segue back to schools and education. At Summit, do you do you have anything that you would say? Look, when you walk into Summit, one thing that you'll could you give us a sense of what is different about Summit, and if you want to do that through here's a day in the life or the routine, because I think it is very different from the way I went to school, the way actually my kids go to school.
Yeah, I think that what's interesting is a lot of times people walk into a school and think it's going to be a good school if there's a few things that happen. So one, certainly the way that it looks, and some schools are beautiful, right? But then second, I think people think it's a good school if kids are really orderly and they're all facing the teacher and they seem to be studiously doing their work. That's actually not what you're going to see at Summit. And that's not what my version so I think you're going to see a lot of different things at Summit, but here's the commonality, and this is what I'm really looking for. One, the kids are going to be really nice to you when you walk in the door. And they'll actually stop and they'll ask you, can I help you? Do you need something? And if you ask them a question about what they're doing, they'll start to talk to you. And when you start talking to them, they will tell you, and you ask them, well, what are you working on? They'll be able to tell you. Why are you working on that? They'll be able to tell you. how does that connect to who you are or what you're doing? They'll be able to tell you. And they're not going to be common answers. They're going to be very different answers depending on who the student is. But every student you encounter in a Summit School is going to do that with you. And to me, that's the hallmark of a Summit School, is that kids they might literally be on the floor with headphones in and their hood up, but if you tap them on the shoulder, they're going to be able to engage in that conversation with you. And to me, that's the most important thing.
Is there a kind of magic wand wish that you have about, so that is so radically, my kids go to public schools, never looks like that. Do you have a kind of magic wand wish that you're like, look, if there was one thing I could, make happen, sprinkle fairy dust on the other schools, would it be what you just described, like, having kids be in charge of their own learning more, or would it be something else? Like, what do you think it would be?
One is hard. I could pick three.
Yeah.
We did pick.
Since you wrote a whole book, you get three magic wishes.
One is really that we're teaching in a project-based way, that it's really authentic and hands-on. So that's for sure one thing. The second thing is that the school has organized itself to really believe that kids should be developing the skills to have their own agency, to make their own decisions, to guide their own learning. And when you have that as a belief, you really reorganize how the school looks. And then the third one is that they have a mentor, that they have someone who is their on-campus, on-site adult advocate who they can connect to, who knows about them, who sees them, who cares about them.
I sort of know the answer to this, but I'll ask the question, these mentors, so every kid has a mentor, don't you run out of grown-ups because there are so many kids? Like, how do you do that?
No, every mentor works with about 18 to 20 kids, and the beauty of it is, the original design was very much about the relationship between the student and the mentor. But the interesting thing is when you have a group, they actually become a group and a community. And one of the most beautiful outcomes of this mentoring is the actual mentor group. And so one of my favorite parts of our school is at graduation, the kids actually graduate in their mentor groups. And so their processional is as a mentor group. And these are kids who start out, they come from totally different backgrounds. Summit schools are diverse by design. So they come from totally different backgrounds. They don't know each other. These are unlikely kids. In a traditional school that's tracked, they would probably never be in classes together. And
like High School Musical, where there's like different...
Exactly. And by the time they are graduating, they are truly a family. And that is the language you will hear from them at graduation. That is how they see each other. That is how they've come together. And this adult is a part of that, but the adult is a part of that. The adult is not the center of that. It really is a community.
I'm keeping my eye on the time, and I'm going to encourage people, if you have questions, so maybe now would be a good time to jot them down, and then in a few minutes, if we could maybe go up on both stairs, we'll go up and down, and then just like discreetly wave it. And as we do, so as I get to ask my final questions and turn it over to you, I was curious about your son Rhett, and I wondered, we got a little bit of this from Emma, but like, what's he doing now? And like, what's the update? And what maybe have you learned that surprised you, or if there is something like that? Yeah.
So he is a senior at Summit Denali, which is one of our schools. He started there in 6th grade, so he is a long-running Summit student. And I think it's important for me to say, when he entered 6th grade, in 5th grade, his teacher actually recommended that we test him for special education. And she was very concerned.
And wait, why was that? Yeah.
She was very concerned that he might have dysgraphia, his writing is hard to read, that he might have some processing challenges, getting thoughts onto actual paper, some sort of classic things like that, because he was really struggling in a fairly traditional elementary setting. I was worried as a former English teacher. I didn't know that he was ever going to be able to write a coherent paragraph. And I literally can go back in my journal and find those entries where I'm like beside myself thinking, how does an English teacher's son literally not know how to write a paragraph? This feels like a problem, and I don't know what to do about it. So fast forward to his senior year, and his expedition or his explore pursue this year is one he's crafted for himself, so our kids can do that. And he actually has developed this huge passion in history and geography. He makes maps. He is just obsessed with current events in the world, and it's his thing. It's where he's found his passion. And he has this theory about politics and power.
Oh, good. We need a theory of politics right now.
Yeah.
That would be good.
Reflective of and he is spending his expeditions this year doing research on that, writing up his theory, and literally reaching out to people to help him with this. And it's so interesting you asked me about my view of myself as being smart, and I don't see myself as...
You think you're smart now?
Not in the conventional way, not in the way that I think he has confidence, where he literally is cold calling professors to help him. And I'm like, I wouldn't do that to this. Well, I cold call you.
Yeah, no, but you do a little bit.
I do that a little bit.
Yeah,
But, he's really passionate about
and confident.
And confident.
Yeah.
And determined that he's not going to go to a traditional university.
So what does he want to do?
He has spent a lot of time looking and researching, and he is really excited about a new university called Minerva, which is 4 years old.
Wait, isn't that a Greek goddess, Minerva?
It's possible.
So Google it.
It's 4 years old. It is designed to be completely different, and so it is very self-directed. It is very project-based. The kids spend the first year, in San Francisco, where they're learning a basic set of skills, and then they live the next 6 semesters in a different world city. They travel as a cohort. Their curriculum is in the city that they're going to. Their professors live around the world.
That is very different.
Yeah, it's very different.
Okay, I hope there's a postcard in that for me. Okay, so speaking of cards, I think we have the questions, and I'll turn it back over to Emma to curate them, and we'll see how many we can get answered by Diane before we go to book signing.
My apologies if we don't get to your question, because we have quite a few good ones, so we'll do our best though. So starting with, we have 2 here that I think we can sort of tackle together. How do you get more parents involved, and how should school leaders and teachers think about the role of parents? And then connected to that, how do schools support and listen to parents without disadvantaging students whose parents, for whatever reason, are not able to be as involved in the school?
Such a good and important question. The way I would think about this, and I really do think it's a combined question, is I do think that we as educators and professionals, and I think it's over the last couple of years, educators have really taken a beating in a lot of ways. And the reality is I believe deeply in teachers and educators, and I think we are professionals, and I think it's our job to create and design experiences for all kids that are based in the science and based in experience and based in the knowledge that we have that work for all kids. And so I think that we need to be given the respect and the space to do that. And I think when we do that design, we have to thoughtfully include the parents in that design in whatever form they're able to engage with us. And so for some parents, this will be very active engagement, and for others, it will be minimal engagement, and I think it can't disadvantage the student either way. And I know that sounds really hard to do, but I think that that is our challenge, and I do think that it's possible.
So on a different tack, going back to the college question, so I support the idea that every child should find the best college for them. Pragmatically, however, there are real differences in opportunities for a Stanford, Harvard graduate or versus someone who graduates from a CUNY, especially for job candidates of color. How do you reconcile this and think about it when it comes to opening up pathways for your children and for your students?
Yeah, completely true. I think that, one of the reasons that people will pay the price tag for those top 50 colleges and that they will, put everything into trying to get into them is because you're effectively buying into a network and you're buying a brand that goes on to you. And
You get a sweatshirt with the brand on it.
It's valuable. There's no doubt about that. And it comes potentially at a cost as well, which is if you're doing that and you've done it in a way that isn't authentic to you or what you care about or what you value, I'm not sure that you end up living the fulfilled life. And so there's as many stories of people who've gone to not the top 50, but one of the other 2,000, who really know who they are and know what they want and know what they care about and end up being as successful or more successful without that outside brand, but because they know what they want. And successful on their terms, in a life that they want, in a way that they want to live. And so to me, that is the ultimate, look, I don't see Harvard and Stanford anytime soon deciding that they're gonna serve, 10,000 more kids. So they are actively working to constrain the amount of seats they have so that they can have that brand. And I think we can decide that we're gonna play into that, or we can decide that we're gonna actually pursue fulfillment collectively as a society. And I think put some pressure on them to maybe think about if they're so great, they should serve more people.
So again, two connected questions. When you provide a child with agency at Summit, what happens when they make bad choices or waste time? And then I think connected to this, how can I keep my child, who's a 14-year-old boy, from outside influences and bad choices?
Yeah. So the most important piece about agency is recognizing that it's a set of skills and that they're teachable. And so the way that we honestly don't keep kids from making bad choices or wasting time. That's part of the learning process. So you have to understand that when you're going to teach kids skills, in order to not do that eventually, you have to give them the freedom to actually make mistakes and then learn from that and be able to move forward. And so it's recognizing that that's going to happen, understanding the skills that they need to build and grow, and then actually having a curriculum and an approach that enables them to build those skills over time. But it's having some tolerance for that lack of, those moments when they do waste time. The other thing I always like to remind people of, I don't know how many of you in this realm literally work through your workday without ever getting distracted, without ever just peeking on your phone for a minute or two, without ever just going on Amazon for a minute and buying the thing that you need. Or I don't know how many of us as adults are perfect and completely engaged for the entire time we're there. And so I do think that there's some realism around this as well that I think we embrace. I think the second part of the question was, at home, how do we protect our kids or get them to not be susceptible so much to these outside influences? And I think the best antidote to that, I'd be curious your thoughts on this, is knowing yourself. I mean, kids who really are confident in and figuring out who they are and they feel good about that and they have outlets for that and they know who they are far less susceptible to what other people think of them, to influences, to potentially dangerous experimentation. So to me, that's the antidote for that. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Well, I thought of one thing this is an appropriate. You not only have the book, you have a website, Prepared for Success,
Yes.
and I was on it on my way here from Philadelphia, and maybe not this very specific question, but I think a lot of these kinds of questions
Yes.
you have. So it's preparedforsuccess.org.
Yes.
Okay, so there's that.
Yes.
One thing I thought. And the other thing is, I do think that when you said that when you come to a Summit School, what you'll see are students who greet you, who shake your hand, who look you in the eye and tell you what they're doing, and they'll be nice, and if you're lost, they'll probably ask you if you need help. I do think that being intentional as a parent about picking the school, because developmentally during adolescence, how much just naturally, biologically, mammals, including human beings, are attuned to peers as opposed to parents, right? It's hard to describe, but they so care what their friends are doing and saying and wearing and thinking. So as a parent, you're like, well, if I got a 14-year-old, like what can I do? Well, I do think that is why parents should be very intentional and thoughtful about helping their students be in a school where those peer influences are going to be positive. And then, you say this so much in the book, like, and right for that kid. I mean, it's not like every school is right for every kid, but don't just be like, oh yeah, my kids have to go to this school. It's like, it's right there, it's around the corner. Like it really matters, I think, those kinds of choices.
Yeah, awesome.
How do you support a student who finds school and athletics easy? They're used to being successful and they don't fail. What do you do to support them?
Yeah, sabotage them.
Yeah, trip them on the way to the finish line.
Whole rope. I think that, look, I don't know. I can't think of a human being where there isn't something that could be challenging to them. And so, one of the 5 behaviors of a self-directed learner, which is one of the things we care about, is challenge seeking. And so, we have a lot of kids who come to Summit who it comes pretty easily to them and it comes naturally and they do well in school. And what we teach them is, look, self-directed learners actually seek out challenge. That's what they do. They don't just sort of sit back and rest and, well, I'm better than the rest of you. It's about me and it's my internal sort of bar. And so that's where I would focus is, what is challenging, what is interesting, and sparking that in the child and getting them to go after it.
What do you look for when you hire educators?
Yeah, a lot of the same stuff that we're trying to develop in our kids. And so actually that last question made me think a lot about growth mindset and just the orientation towards that learning comes from hard work, and that it's not just something I'm born with or I'm not born with or I'm good at or I'm not good at, that I can become good at things, I can develop things. And so that growth mindset is really critical. The teaching role at Summit is very different from the teaching role at a lot of other places. And so we look for teachers who want to learn different skills, who want to do different things, who care very much about the whole human being, and that becomes first, and the technical subject becomes second. Not that we don't want people who don't care about what they're, whether it be biology or math or whatnot. That interest and that passion is important, but what they care about is not that in and of itself, but that other people get excited about it and care about it and learn it and use it. And so those are the pieces that we look for.
And what would you say to a parent who was looking for a school that gave their kids some of what they get at Summit? And what might you caution a parent about a mindset that they might bring in to say, oh, I don't know if this is a good school because I'm seeing a kid with headphones or whatever it is.
Yeah. So I definitely think that there are more and more schools who are orienting towards a project-based curriculum or a hands-on real-world curriculum. So I would certainly be looking for that. I would advise that. And then I think the second thing I would be looking for is the school's sort of orientation and mindset around, maybe I should say a sort of compliance type environment versus a more ownership agency type environment. So does the school talk about kids being really orderly and I'm not opposed to order, but are they more focused on telling kids, show up at this time, do this assignment, follow these directions, or are they more interested in kids really figuring out and driving their own experiences? And so to the extent that you can find that, that's what I would look for.
And why is it so hard for schools to do what Summit is doing? And what do you think is most needed for these practices to spread more systemically?
I think one of the hardest parts of this is middle and high schools, for certain, are organized where teachers are really kind of independent contractors. At university level is like this as well, right? And so we organize around the adults, and we say, well, this is the piece that I do. I do this course. And then we say to the students, you've got to put all those pieces together and somehow make it coherent for you. And the flip of that is saying, oh, we should actually think about the experience of the student and make that coherent and make that make sense, which means we as the adults actually have to collaborate and align and work together to have a coherent experience for the kids. And that's the hardest part, because schools right now, the way time is organized, the way the jobs are organized, they're not designed to do that. There's no space for the adults to do that. There's no opportunity for that to happen. The adults who do want to do that, when are they going to do that? You know, on Saturday morning at 9 o'clock at night. And so I think that's the biggest hurdle, quite frankly.
This is sort of for both of you. How do the ideas in Grit and Diane's ideas about Summit intersect and diverge?
You give your answer. I'll look at my notes. I really have like.
She
notes
really
on
does.
this. I'm like, I ran out of room. I had to write on the actual cover.
I think
Hope
you
you don't
have
mind.
some notes in there of like grit. And
Yes,
page
I
numbers.
do. Like with exclamation marks and yes, page numbers.
Well, here's what I would say. So much of what we do at Summit is grounded in the amazing work of people like Angela and other incredible researchers, and we're so grateful to them. And in fact, I think
We all love you. You know that.
Well, I
Like,
think
everyone will answer your
it's
call.
a-
It's like, oh, it's Diane. Okay.
but I think so because we actually do something.
Yes, exactly.
know?
That's why we love you.
Yeah,
Like you
and
actually like listen, and then you're like, oh, we redid our goal setting thing because you told us like, yeah.
Like last week you told us that, and then we'll do it. So there really is this relationship. And so I would say, I mean, look, I didn't make up any of this stuff. People always ask me, well, they call Summit innovative. I'm like, I don't know if it's innovative. We didn't make any of this up. We literally brought it together in a coherent model, but we didn't do any of this original sort of work. And so much of what we're talking about here, I think actually intersects with Angela's work and so many other amazing researchers. I'm going to let her tell you the very specific ways that grit shows up, even though I think we use slightly differently.
If I'm right, Emma, this might be the last question. Is that right? Because timing-wise, can we end with Diane? Can you read this? This is one of the things I marked off, right? And it starts with whatever it takes, WIT. For sure, and it's on page 241, and I think this captures
Great.
the answer to that question would be a great way to end the evening.
So whatever it takes, WIT, you'll find the words or acronym in notes from our meetings at Summit and posted in the copy room. You'll hear them in conversations among teachers and with students. WIT is in the stories we tell ourselves and one another. Oh.
See, I knew you were going it's emotional stuff.
WIT is far more than a phrase. It's our culture. It's a mindset that drives our decisions. It's how we approach our work and what has driven us year after year. And like everything we've ever done at Summit, whatever it takes is evolved over time. Whatever it takes doesn't mean we do everything for kids. It doesn't mean we accept the way things are and just work longer and harder to try to overcome. It doesn't mean when we get stuck, we lower our standards or give up. In order to truly live whatever it takes, we find a way. We believe there's always a way to open a locked door.
Thank you.